Hey guys, what's going on? Dan here as per usual. A little bit earlier tonight, just because I finished the day a bit earlier with clients and whatnot. So, day one, we talked about quite a few things. If you haven't had a chance, you need to go check out that video. Yesterday, we talked about some kind of nutritional and lifestyle considerations that you need to take on board if you want to optimize your results. And today, we are going to talk about plyometrics, and kind of just give you a little bit of a lowdown as to how you can start incorporating this into your training, into your workouts. We're talking about a little bit of theory, again, trying to keep things super simple so that you can take it away and start applying it from tomorrow, basically. So first thing we're going to go through is just a little bit of the theory part. Now, a big thing with plyometrics is I think a lot of people feel like this is kind of everything that you need to do in your program if you want to jump higher, run faster, be more reactive. And it is a big component, but we do also need to incorporate certain strength elements in there, some main lifts, some compound lifts, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit more tomorrow, how to structure your maybe lower body strength work as well as your upper body strength work throughout your week, okay? But a big part of everyone's program, especially as you transition through the off season, is going to be plyometrics. And the big thing we need to understand is that you need to earn the right to progress. So what you want to maybe do tomorrow isn't what you're necessarily going to be doing in 3 to 4 months time. When you're getting ready to go into preseason, you want to be springy, you want to be explosive, you want to jump high, you want to run faster, okay? So let's just dive straight into the theory, and we're just going to kind of talk through this graph here. So it might look a bit confusing, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. So the idea is if we look at this kind of green line, right, so kind of representing this curve here, this is the ideal, right, or minimum or maximum or maybe overload in terms of volume. So volume, think total sets, the amount of reps that we're doing in those sets, and how our body is adapting to that. So as an example is, let's say we wanted to do box jumps, okay? So let's say we're doing box jumps, all right? And you decide you're gonna do 10 sets of 5 box jumps, okay? Now, 10 sets is gonna be a lot of volume. It doesn't really matter if you are an advanced lifter, if you've been doing plyometrics for a long time, or if you're somebody who's just starting out. 10 sets is probably rarely going to be done. So the idea is, how would you adapt if you were doing 10 sets of 5 box jumps? So we have, essentially in this graph, we have an area where it's called kind of the minimum amount of volume. So I'll put MIN here. So minimum amount of volume where you're going to start seeing adaptation. So let's say you did, instead of 10, you did, let's say 2 sets of 5, all right? So 2 sets of 5, you're in this area of, you know what, it's not too much, but it's kind of on the edge of actually not being enough for me to get results out of that box jump, to be more explosive, okay? So a lot of times it's better to start on that lower end of volume, right? Maybe 2 sets, 3 sets max, 3 to 4 reps in the beginning. As you get more efficient with the movement, as you get better, as you get more tolerant, then you can add more load, you can add more volume. Now, there's obviously an area here where it's kind of an optimal zone of adaptation. So let's say maybe that zone is going to be, like I said, 3 sets of 5, all right? So 3 sets of 5, that gives us kind of an optimal range of where we're going to get adaptation from our volume. So that means it's just enough so that we're not maybe getting too sore, right? It's just enough so we're still recovering perfectly, but it's not too little that we don't get the most out of it. So hopefully that makes sense. So essentially this whole area, kind of under this curve, is going to be an adaptation zone. So that's where we actually get something from performing those exercises at that volume for those amount of sets, those amount of reps, all right? Then we have kind of a max area. So imagine, let's say this max area is going to be, I don't know, 5 sets of 5, right? Especially if you're somebody who doesn't do a lot of plyometrics, you might be like a beginner to an intermediate lifter. 5 sets of 5 might be a little bit too much. So maybe 5 sets of 5 is going to fall into kind of this max zone of threshold. So we look at this as like a threshold area. So 5 sets of 5, it's almost past that point where you're not really going to adapt, but it's enough that, you know, you can still get a bit out of it, but it's not too little, it's not optimal, it's just on the edge. All right. So then what we do is we have an area of where we're below the threshold. So we're below the amount of load, the amount of volume, the amount of reps, the amount of sets, or we're over it so that our body actually doesn't get anything whatsoever. And it gets to a point where it's actually maybe a bit dangerous. This is where injuries start creeping up. You start getting tendonitis, and, in your Achilles, in your patellar tendon, just around the joints in general. So let's say, for example, we only do one set of 5 box jumps. Now we fall into this zone here, which is going to be basically too little for us to even get anything out of it, right? We might get a little bit, but it's barely anything. If we decide we're going to do, let's say, 6 sets of 5, so remember this area was maybe 5 sets of 5 is the max that we could do without kind of getting to that, like, a bit of a zone where we're overdoing it. Well, let's say 6 sets of 5, now we fall into this area, right? So now we're actually getting to a point where we're not getting much out of this. It's actually too much, finding it hard to recover, and it's getting to a point where actually if we ended up doing more sets, then we start getting into like injury territory. So let's say, like I said earlier, if you did 10 sets of 5 box jumps and you're doing that a couple times a week, you then start falling into this danger zone. So a lot of times, just from experience, from what I've seen a lot of my guys do in the past before they started working with me, doesn't matter if they're basketball guys or they're netball players, regardless of what they play, is most people tend to kind of be in this area where they're trying to be like in an optimal zone, and they try to actually probably do a little bit too much. And then what happens is, because they might not be getting the results that they're expecting, they might actually push it to a point where they're doing drop jumps at too high of a box level. They're doing way too many jumps in general. They're doing it every day instead of every other day. They're having no rest periods in between. And then obviously if their food, their sleep, and all these other areas of their lifestyle isn't kind of like at least 80% there, they're probably going to find that their injuries, that their body just in general feels shit, okay? So hopefully that makes sense, but the idea is that we need to do enough to get adaptation. In a perfect world, we do just enough where it's optimal. Sometimes we might do a little bit too much, but we still get a benefit. And then at times you might do so much that you actually get no benefit at all, or you actually start getting pain and you start getting injuries. So that's kind of the concept of how plyometric kind of volume is going to work. And what I would always recommend is, if you're going to kind of start off with any kind of plyometric stuff, I would always say start on the low end. So maybe start with like 2 sets of anywhere between like 2 to 6, okay? And that's a really, really good place to start, because if you start noticing that you're jumping on higher boxes, you're jumping faster, you're jumping at better speeds, you're holding medicine balls, you're doing pogos, you're doing drop jumps, and everything starts creeping up in the right direction, well then at this point, maybe you can start adding your sets, and maybe you're going to start doing maybe 3 times 2 to 6, right? On your next phase of training, and maybe then it's going to be 3 sets of 4 to 8, right? And you can kind of see how that starts working. So that's how I would start progressing your plyometrics from a volume perspective. Before you even start thinking about load, so before you start holding weights, or you start adding a weighted vest, or you start adding a barbell to your back, start body weight, master the movements, make sure you're progressing, and then kind of go from there. So that then takes us into another area. So I'm just going to erase this real quick. So if we then start looking at plyometrics more from like a progression perspective. Now, this is an area where a lot of people tend to make a few mistakes in terms of how they're progressing their plyometrics from extensive plyometrics to intensive plyometrics. So extensive, just think this is going to be like hops, skips, light jumps, more rhythm kind of coordination work. And I would massively kind of suggest you don't underestimate that. Because like I told you before, some of the best athletes I've had in here have the best rhythm and flow, and they're really good at picking up like skipping patterns, hop patterns, and things like that. So you want to start at kind of areas where you're maybe doing things like 30 to 60 seconds worth of hops and skips, and really building that endurance in the muscles and in the tendons Think your Achilles, think your foot, think your calf, think the anterior tib, which is at the front of your calf, so or in the front of your shin. So all these areas is what you're trying to build up at the very beginning of your plyometric phases. So if I'm doing a prep phase with my guys, I'm doing, maybe 3 or 4 different plyometric exercises. Are going to be more extensive, so a little bit lighter, not as intense. And then as we progress over time, we start building those into, the box jumps, the counter movement jumps, holding weight in our hands, variations of drop jumps, start from maybe a light box or a lower height in terms of a box, okay? And then as we go with time, that's where we then start adding, like I said, the box jumps, variations of the jumps. Then we start looking at maybe doing some hurdles. And again, you can do some low level hurdles without necessarily having to go crazy and make it super reactive and super demanding on your central nervous system. But you could start with some super low level hurdles, maybe like 12 to 20 inches, and just working on timing, right? A little skip in between each jump. Sometimes you might go all the way through as you jump, right? There's so many variations, but as you start progressing through these extensive, which are going to be longer duration, much lighter, much more hops and rhythms and skips, you're going to progressively go into more intensive work. And this is going to be very much low volume, max intent, so high quality reps, massive amount of rest in between each set. So this is where we're going to do things like bounds, whether it's, broad jumps consecutively or single leg broad jumps consecutively, or drop jumps from higher boxes. We might start doing single leg hurdles. We might start doing a lot of single leg kind of horizontal and vertical movements. So you need to think about plyometrics as one, how much can you actually get out of it in terms of adaptation without going overboard? And then 2, where do you currently find yourself on the beginner to advanced stage? If you're someone who's been doing virtually no plyometrics, so like I said, nothing on this end for pretty much ever, then you need to start here first. And yeah, you might be a bit impatient, but that's just the work you got to put in, especially if you don't want to get hurt and you don't want to start getting tendonitis in all these areas. But if you're someone who's maybe done some plyometrics, you have a bit of history with it, you feel quite competent and skilled, then maybe you're going to kind of start in that middle portion where you're still doing drop jumps, you're doing some elements of hurdles, but you're progressively earning the right to progress so that you can get to that single leg stuff. You can start adding weights, you can start adding weighted vests, you can start really kind of like testing your ability to move in different directions. So hopefully that makes sense, but the idea is you have to earn the right to progress. You have to start light and then you have to build it over time, just like you would with any other lift or any compound movement. You wouldn't just put 200 kilos on your back if you've never squatted before. So you're not going to just jump into some bounds and some max jumps, if you haven't done that before either. So that's how we kind of take care of our plyometrics. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, just drop them into the chat, into the Facebook group. There's not going to be necessarily any PDFs for this today, so I just suggest you keep watching over this and ask questions. And just make sure you keep staying in touch with the videos over the next few days. Tomorrow I'm going to be kind of starting to drop a bit more exciting information about some kind of cool opportunities I've got for those of you who might want some support and some guidance with kind of leveling up your game. Not really sure where to start just yet. And then on Friday I kind of drop that opportunity for a select few people who want to start working towards achieving their goals. So definitely stay tuned. Keep watching the videos. Any questions, let me know, guys. But have a great night. We'll see you later.